The first members of the congregation of the Queen's State funeral have arrived at Westminster Abbey as tens of thousands packed the procession route that became full just before 8:30 a.m. 2,000 royals, world leaders and members of the public have begun filing into the Abbey as billions around the world will watch Her Majesty's state funeral. Now to give us more, our correspondent Sally Patterson is in the United Kingdom. Good afternoon, Sally. As the world prepares for the Queen's burial, what is the prevailing ambience in the United Kingdom?
Well, it's certainly a somber mood here today, especially as we've started to see the beginning of the ceremony begin, and we've seen those first images of the coffin being brought into Westminster Abbey, which is just behind me in the centre of London. And we've seen King Charles lead his sons and the other members of his family into that abbey. And there is certainly a sense of mourning, a sense of loss as they begin that service, which is of course being live streamed to billions of people around the world, as it's predicted to be. And so along that path that we're expecting to see the coffin take later on, when the ceremony is finished, there are hundreds of thousands, perhaps even millions of people who've been there for hours, some waiting overnight, some even there at the beginning of the weekend to get that spot where they'll be able to see that coffin on its final journey out of London and to Windsor. And there's been a mixture then of a very mournful feeling that we have now, but also lots of celebrations throughout the weekend. People were celebrating Her Majesty's life, they're celebrating some of the highlights that they've seen, they're celebrating being able to be part of this very special moment, probably a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And so people have been waving flags, meeting one another, you know, sharing tea and coffee and stories about and memories about the royal family and the monarch. And so there is really a mixed feeling here, and I'm sure throughout the day people are going to shed tears but also have very fond memories and hopefully some joyful moments as well.
Mixed feelings are there. Now, Queen Elizabeth's body has been lying in state since Wednesday, with people paying their last respects. The crowd has had to endure long queues. Now, were there any incidents of stampedes?
Well, this was a very British queue. It's no secret that the Brits love to queue, and this was no exception. This was a very calm, a very well-behaved queue, which stretched several miles, reaching up to 5 miles at certain points. People waiting more than 12 hours to have their moment to stream past Her Majesty's coffin in Westminster Hall, the oldest part of Westminster Palace behind me, which is of course where our Parliament building is as well. And they were just waiting for that moment to walk past, have that quiet moment of reflection. Many stopped to cross themselves or to say a short prayer, or just to say thank you to Her Majesty, who for most of them has been the only monarch they've ever known until Prince Charles became King Charles just a few days ago. And it's been a real change here in the United Kingdom and around the world. But on the whole, this was a very well organised and a very patient and actually very cheerful queue. We saw some celebrities also make their way down there. David Beckham, for example, the famous footballer, did queue. He waited his turn, waiting more than 12 hours in that line to have his opportunity to see the Queen's coffin. And on the whole, you know, people travelled from near and far. People came from the other side of London, but they also came from around the world. There were people coming from several hours away who just wanted to come and have their moment to say thank you to the Queen.
Now, Sally, amongst those people who've travelled far to come and witness this, who are some of the key dignitaries that have flown in to attend the Queen's funeral?
Well, over the weekend, we have seen a number of dignitaries land in London. Many of them landed just to the west of London, and many of them have been transported around on big buses because the security that so many of them would need, the number of cars would take up so much space that they've been asked to share these buses together, which many of them have indeed done. An exception is the President of the United States, Joe Biden, who has come with his wife and also with his own her security services with him, and he's traveling in the security car, which is known as the Beast because it is so safe and so strong. But most of the other dignitaries are traveling together. They've been landing over the weekend and are now sitting in Westminster Abbey. There are about 2,000 people in there. That's royals, there's also volunteers, people who have been honoured by the Queen over the past few years, who are also able to be in there alongside dignitaries. And so we've seen, as well as Joe Biden, we've seen the Emperor of Japan, we've seen the King of Spain, and of course other state and world and leaders from around the world who wanted to have their moment to come and say goodbye themselves. Many of them have had the chance to meet Her Majesty, some more than once, and they wanted to come and share stories about those meetings with others. And many of them also met King Charles in his new role as the King of England at Buckingham Palace at a special reception on Sunday. And so that was also gave them an opportunity to see each other, to meet and to reflect on the good memories as well as mourn together.
Speaking of the new king, how has he been handling his new role and having to mourn at the same time?
Well, that's exactly right. That this is, of course, at the very heart of it, a man who has lost his mother, who he was incredibly close to. He's been in his mother's shadow for most of his life. He's spent his years walking with her, being with her, supporting her in his role as prince. He was, of course, her eldest son, and so took on many of the roles that entailed. And over the past few years, as the Queen went into her 90s, he started to take on the jobs that she just found it, more and more difficult to do. Her mobility did start to fail her in her final few years. And so he took on those roles. And so really he did know what was expected of him already. But that doesn't make it any easier watching him at this ceremony and over the last few days, having lost his mother, and of course his children, Prince Harry and Prince William, have now lost their grandmother, their beloved grandmother. Both of them have given tributes to the woman who was such a guiding presence in their lives. People have called her the nation's grandmother, but of course for them this is their granny, and so they're mourning a very personal loss, a very personal connection, whereas people around the world see her as this state figure. And so you can see on their faces that it's a very troubling time for them. People are reminded of the funeral of Princess Diana 25 years ago, where her very young sons, who were just teenagers at the time, walked behind her coffin, and the pain was etched upon their faces, and you can see that again now. But we're also seeing both the Queen's grandchildren and also her children out over the past few days, meeting members of the public, shaking their hands, speaking to them, taking flowers from them, and obviously enjoying the sense of support that they feel from the members of the public who want to show that they stand with the royal family at this difficult time. Many people, of course, lost family members during the COVID-19 pandemic, and so people can relate to how difficult this is for people who are grieving, for family members who have lost someone who was such a key person in their lives, and the matriarch, of course, of the royal family, and so a figure for them on a very personal level. And they'll have that opportunity later on today to have a much more small, intimate, personal service, which won't be live streamed, and that's going to be over at Windsor Castle before the Queen's coffin is buried for the final time, and that will be their chance as a family to say goodbye.
Before you go, Sally, let's go down memory lane. Now, what are some of the key highlights of Queen Elizabeth's reign, and what is at the center of her legacy?
Well, the Queen was on the throne for 70 years. She was Britain's longest serving monarch, and one of the longest serving monarchs in the whole world. And so she has seen such change over her reign. But what Queen Elizabeth in many ways will be remembered for is the stability that she brought. She was a rock for many. She was a pillar of strength. Many people will remember her Christmas speech, which she gave every year. Families around the United Kingdom would turn on the television on Christmas Day to watch that speech where she would talk about hope. She would look to the new year. She would talk about strength. And for many people, especially when they were facing hardships, she was a real beacon of light and strength. Of course, COVID-19 pandemic is an obvious example where she came and addressed the nation, not just at Christmas, but she did a special address, which is very unusual, where she said to people, "We'll meet again." And those words, which of course throw us back to the Second World War, reminded people who were very isolated, many of whom were stuck at home by themselves, weren't able to see family and friends. It reminded them that they would of course be reunited at some time soon. And so she was that figure of strength for many people. And she saw 15 different prime ministers during her reign. The first, of course, Winston Churchill, and the final one, who she met just literally days before she died, was the Prime Minister Liz Truss, who will be speaking at the funeral today. And so she's seen a huge amount of change over those years. She's seen world events take place. She's seen different politics. She's seen people lead the UK in a different way. She's seen different events in the Commonwealth. But at the very heart of it, she has been that figure of stability. She's been a figure of calm, and the people who've met her remember that twinkle in her eye, that sense of humor, that way that she remembered people who she met, and she loved to be out and about meeting people on the streets. She didn't hide away in the castle, and for many people that made her a woman of the people, and she was very much a queen who loved her people. She loved going out and meeting them, and she will of course be remembered fondly by so many people here in the United Kingdom and around the world.
So many beautiful memories there, Sally. Thank you very much for that update. That was our correspondent, CTN Prime correspondent, Sally Patterson, who is currently in the UK, where she was giving us an update of the Queen's burial.